All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our blog post discussion on reading for teaching. My name is Lisa Endersby, and I am an educational developer in the Teaching Commons and co-facilitator of Reading for Teaching. And I'll have Scott, my co-partner in crime, co-reader in crime, introduce himself. Over to you, Scott.
Hi, everyone. My name is Scott McLaren. I'm a librarian in the Teaching and Learning Department in the libraries. I'm also a faculty member in the Humanities Department. And I'm very happy to be here and talk about our program.
So, Scott, I think
So,
you might have a question for
yes,
me.
I have questions. We have questions. Lisa and I are going to interview each other, and that way we'll have something to actually talk about. So, Lisa, the first question for you is, how would you describe the Reading for Teaching program? And what is the program? What are some of its goals?
This reminds me of, I think, the very first conversation you and I had, Scott, when I was trying to not so subtly get you on board for the program all those many moons ago. I think for me, if I can be somewhat flippant about it, reading for teaching was in part a way to encourage folks to read and to read about teaching. I find that folks like myself are quite busy, and we don't
Mm.
often make time for reflective practice, and reading is one really great way to do that. So the program was a way to add some level of structure to reading, while also adding some level of community to our reading, because often reading feels like a very individual, isolated practice. So I think largely the two goals would be to read and to think about teaching through our reading, but also to do that in a way that connects people to the broader teaching and learning community at York. I don't know, Scott, from your point of view as a librarian, if there's anything you wanted to
Yeah,
add to
I
that.
think, it's interesting. I think being in the academy, one of the things you realize is that there is such an unyielding emphasis on being productive all the time. And being productive usually means writing. And so it's often very hard to carve out time for reading, especially if that reading is not directly connected to your research agenda. And so this group for me creates a sort of a space where you can push those obligations away for at least a small space of time and come together with some other people who are interested in improving their teaching practice and doing it through reading. So I see our group as sort of an indulgence, actually, and yet it's also really important, I think, to stand back and reflect on teaching through reading in order to improve what we do in the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that reframe of, this is something hopefully people want to do, not
Mhm.
just something we feel like we have to do, because we have enough of those already.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So for folks who are viewing this in the future that we cannot see yet, we are recording this during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so a lot of our discussions and conversations and readings have centered around remote teaching or teaching online. But Scott, you found us a very interesting reading for our current winter 2021 group. So I'm wondering if you could describe our current reading and what motivated you to offer this as an option for our participants this term.
Yeah, so I came across a fascinating book called Manifesto for Teaching Online. And it was just published in 2020, and it grew out of a group of academics at the University of Edinburgh who came together and wanted to talk about in 2011, 10 years ago, the all the different challenges and opportunities that the online teaching environment provided. What's really interesting about this book, though, is that it's not just a long narrative. It's actually a series of, I would say, in many cases, controversial or bold statements that then the authors expand upon. And it's ideal for a group like ours because we can take these statements and bat them around together. So, I mean, some of my favorite ones are assessment. All assessments are acts of interpretation. And so, we're obsessed in the university today with metrics and assessment. We're obsessed in the library. We're obsessed everywhere with these things because it shows the value of our work, right? But it's important, I think, to remember, and this claim in the book reminds us that interpretation is it's subjective, and so these measurements that we come up with are not objective measures of the actual value of whatever it is that we're trying to measure. And those measurements, depending on how we take them and then how we analyze them, that can say a lot about what the conclusions will ultimately be. So that's just an example of one statement that we find in this book. Another one that that appealed to me, one of the things we're really big on in the library is open access scholarship. And so one of the lines is, openness is neither neutral nor natural. It creates and depends on closures. And so that's really interesting to just step back and think about how does openness also, how is it complicated? How is it not an unmitigated good? And so I think what I like about this, what I like about this book is that it just challenges you to think about orthodoxies, I guess, the orthodoxies that we adhere to in the academy in new and different and sometimes even subversive ways.
Yeah, and that subversive piece really caught on, I think, in our first couple of conversations. I also liked the manifesto really troubling this idea of surveillance. And I know our students are really feeling that way with a lot of our online learning or online assessments, which now are not only subjective, but also being surveilled, or there's the element of surveillance there. So these statements are an interesting way to spark some really good conversation with colleagues that we have this term anyway, that are from all sorts of different disciplines, who teach in all sorts of different ways, but have a really common challenge of reacting to. I mean, we can think about all those stupid pandemic words like pivoting and adapting or whatever it is, but they've
Mm-hmm.
had to do all of that, and there are broader implications than we thought.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up that whole subject of surveillance, because it's a nice sort of segue into the next question, which is what themes, ideas, insights, and questions have arisen for you about teaching and learning based on our conversation so far this term. And one of the things that I found so interesting about the last conversation we had around these issues of surveillance, is how all the faculty seem to be, regardless of your discipline, are struggling to find ways, especially in the online environment, to impart the principles of academic integrity to their students, and realizing that there are so many different ways in which students understand that concept, and that if a student breaches academic integrity, it's not always a mortal sin in the sense that they're setting out to do something evil. Sometimes it's a misunderstanding, sometimes it's cultural differences. I was really intrigued even to find the degree to which students, I mean, my background is in humanities, but how students, even in the sciences and maths, find ways to cheat. And then the question was, well, is it actually cheating, or is it essentially just using a calculator? When you find different ways of doing things online. So that, I think that's one of the ways in which some of my ideas have been challenged and troubled, you could say. And there's also this idea of building in, what's the line to that a routine of plagiarism detection structures in distrust.
Mhm.
And the last course I taught, all the students had to submit everything that they wrote to turn it in. I didn't think it was a big deal, and Turnitin produces some really nice reports. It never really occurred to me that students might be looking at that and thinking, well, he must be suspecting I'm cheating if he's making me do this at all, which really wasn't the intention. Students were able to submit their work and then review the report themselves in order to see where they may be, a little wide of the mark. But certainly structuring in distrust is not something I'm interested in doing. So that made me question that practice.
Yeah, and I was thinking along the same lines, and it was really insightful in our conversations that our faculty are, and I suppose we don't necessarily need the reminder, but it's nice to celebrate the fact that our faculty really are very student centered and student focused. And even in this surveillance culture or this mistrust, like their concerns are often less about catching people or wanting to make sure that people are not doing the wrong thing, and that sort of surveillance that we're used to. But they're very of the mind of like, how do I make my learning and teaching environment better? Like, how do I make learning happen in a more equitable way, knowing that trust is really important,
Mm,
like you said. So we've kind of
mm,
circled a little bit around, we know that this idea of surveillance is bad, if I could be so simple. But what does that look like in the classroom and in the classroom now? There are so many layers of context that we're working with. So it's been interesting looking at these faculty that you and I both work with on a semi-regular basis in different ways to support their teaching. And we can sometimes distill it to that notion of trust, like you
mhm,
said. How do we
mhm,
create it? How do we
mm,
sustain it? And what does it look like when we're miles apart, and don't get the chance to be together in the ways that we'd be used to? Because it does seem like it looks different online in ways that we
mhm,
couldn't anticipate.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, and, you know, it's really interesting the way in our group these sorts of insights just pop up.
Mhm.
And for me, oftentimes it's listening to somebody who is working in a different discipline or who has a different kind of experience with their students, either because, their classes are much larger than the classes that I am usually involved with, or the just the subject that they're studying is so different. Um, so I think one of the things I really like about our group is that it brings together these different perspectives, and that again, that leads into another question, which is, what is the value of a reading group like this? Why not just go off and read the manifesto on your own? And I guess I would say the main reason is it's not as much fun. It's not as much fun to just read that book by yourself. Um, one of the things we were talking about in our last group was something that I had found on YouTube. Elon Musk had said, why do people go to university? It's not to learn things. You don't need a university to learn things. I mean, I get that you'd go there to have a good time, but if you want to learn things, you can learn anything you want for free. And I thought, it's a really interesting perspective. It's true that you can go to the library or you can go onto Google or YouTube and you can find out all sorts of things. But what makes this group interesting, and I think what makes going to university worthwhile, is that you become part of a community of scholars or a community of readers, and that ultimately what comes out of that is much greater than what you put in, you know? So yeah, it's fun and it's fruitful.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Those are the 2 words I think we're gonna have to add into the marketing campaign. Come have a fun, fruitful time in reading for teaching. I like it. So I think, yeah, we were talking a little bit more about reading, and maybe to wrap up the conversation, if we think about reading as part of our teaching practice, why do you think, Scott? I mean, you're a librarian, so you might have a biased opinion, but why is reading important to help us reflect on or improve our teaching practice? Like, why read it all alone or in a group?
Yeah, I mean, students ask that sometimes in even, they're taking humanities courses and they might be looking at, say, a text, say a play Shakespeare wrote, and they say, well, why can't I just read the play and write my essay, and share my insights with the professor? And one of the things I always say is that, well, when you're writing an essay, you're entering a conversation, right? You're not just off there by yourself saying, well, these are my insights. The first thing you want to do is your research so you can see where scholarship stands on various issues that may have occurred to you. But ultimately, it's going to deepen your own understanding of the play and help you appreciate the play and get more out of the play. So I guess I would say in an environment like this, taking some time to read about teaching it's not only going to make you a better teacher, but it's going to allow you to get more out of your own teaching and get more out of that student teacher relationship that you're forming in the classroom. There's the old story about the woodcutter, chopping the tree down, and he was having a very hard time getting the tree to fall. And somebody said to him, you really should sharpen your axe, and he said, I don't have time to do that, right? And so I guess that takes us back to this idea that, yeah, this is an indulgence, but it's a critically important indulgence if you want to improve your teaching practice.
Yeah, and I love that idea, Scott. And you and I've talked about this before about entering a conversation. And I think that's really powerful for a couple of reasons. One, because teaching and learning, whether we like it or not, sometimes has its own language. We talk about things in particular ways. We have certain definitions or at least understandings about things. And to go back to one of our favorite terms, we get to trouble those ideas a little bit more
Mhm.
in these conversations because they don't always work for all students or for all teachers. But there's something really unique
Mhm.
about reading because I find I get to hear things explained in a language I would have never used myself. Or I've been
Mhm.
thinking about something and someone else wrote it down in a way that resonates with me more than anything I could have written or that I could have said. And whether I agree with it or not is maybe a different conversation, but it is something that allows me to get out of my own head and get out of my own teaching. Because it's very easy to head down, do what we do, and do it every day. And I would say we all do it very well. But we don't think about it sometimes. We don't get that 50,000 or larger view of what we're doing matters, and the ripple effects go beyond, that single Zoom meeting or the piles of papers. So it's nice to feel connected and to feel connected because we're entering and continuing those conversations. I agree.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, as you say, reading, pausing like that, it equips you and gives you the tools you need, even if those tools are only come in the form of the right language to use, to not only discuss but to just think about these ideas. Right? It
Yeah.
surfaces them, the things that you do and you don't think about. Is pausing and reading about it suddenly makes you think. Just as these statements in the manifesto make you step back and say, wait a second, here's something I've been doing all this time without actually critically evaluating my practice.
And way more fun, like you said, to do that in a group of peers who are supportive and are thinking about the same things. Absolutely.
E-
Well, Scott, any
Exactly. And
final words?
we have some
Any
good laughs, don't we?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we
We have
do.
some good laughs.
Any final words? Any last points before we sign off?
Well, I would just say keep your eyes peeled. We're always looking for new members and we're
Mhm.
also looking for new texts. So if there's texts you want to discuss, there's certainly opportunities to do that with us in the group.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much, everyone. Hopefully, we'll see you in Zoom. And who knows, maybe if you're watching this, we'll actually be together in person at one point or another in the future. Thanks so much, everyone. And thank you, Scott.